Hello and welcome to Be Indie Now, a podcast about independent game development. I'm your host, Tobiah Marks, and with me today is Laura Michet.
Hello.
So you make text-based adventure games, which I find super cool. Tell me about them.
Within the last 2 years, I started working on mostly choose-your-own-adventure style text-based adventure games. The tool that I use most often is Twine, though I have used other tools in the past. I've also experimented with parser-based games through Inform, but I've never actually finished one. I also work in the games industry. I've worked as a quest writer, and I currently work as a producer, but I have never actually produced a project all the way through.
Interesting. So how many games have you say you've made, like indie game stuff?
I've completed 4 or 5 small projects. I forget how many exactly.
So do you define completed as you finished them and then got them out in front of people, or is those ones that just like had an ending kind of thing?
I finished them and put them on the internet.
Cool. So like tell me about the latest one that you put out.
The latest one that I finished was, I think, Desert Hike EX, I don't remember. I made that one for the San Francisco Indie Game Jam thing that they held at TinyCo. I worked on that one with a team of about 5 people.
Oh, wow, that's pretty large.
Yeah.
So, like, what, you did just the writing aspect, or?
Yeah, that was a sort of Oregon Trail homage, I guess, where the theme was a bunch of people are at Burning Man and their car and bitcoins get stolen and they have to walk from Burning Man all the way back to 16th and Mission in San Francisco.
That sounds pretty funny.
Yeah, they a whole bunch of really bad stuff happened to them, and I wrote a whole bunch of the random events that can occur to them. Cool.
So where do you normally put up your games? On your website or other websites, forums?
Games that I make myself, I just host on my website. And
what about that game, since it was a jam game?
That one was hosted on the website of one of the people who worked on the project with us.
Cool. So do you find it like you have like a following on your blog and people are playing your games, or is it mostly just your friend circle that you're putting these games out for?
Usually when I finish a game, I put it up on Facebook for my friends, and then I also attempt to get other people to see it. I don't have a systematic way of doing this. One of the games that I was proudest of, I submitted a screenshot of the node. It was a Twine game. So in Twine, when you work on a game, you have a visual UI that lets you see all the different passages in the game linked by arrows. And there's a Tumblr that posts only pictures of the node maps for these Twine games. And I took a screenshot of the node map for this game and I put it up there. And Porpentine, who runs that Tumblr, ended up putting my game on freeindiegam.es, that website. Mm-hmm. And that's how other people found it. But I don't have a systematic way of getting it out to other people. I do try to get them out to other people outside of Facebook, but I haven't really come up with a system for that yet.
But you're not trying to charge for it or put ads or make money. You're just trying to get people to experience them.
Yeah. I don't need to make money off of my games that I make in my spare time, so I don't really try. I like for as many people as possible to be able to see them.
So what motivates you when you're making a game? Is it just that you have an idea and you want to get it out there, or are you like, what motivates you? What drives you to make games?
I think I would primarily consider myself a writer, even though I do work on games professionally and in my spare time. And I think that, I guess on some philosophical level, writing is the hard work that we do to communicate with other people. So anything that I write that I am proud of, I want other people to see. What motivates me to make any given game or writing project is usually I guess I would just be really passionate about the idea that I'm working on. The thing that motivates me to work on games specifically is that I am very interested in narrative design, both in games and in hypertext stories. And whenever I have a cool idea, or an idea that I think is cool anyway, about the structure of a story or something like that, I really want people to see it and to give me feedback about it.
So why do you like that more than, say, just, writing short stories or writing a novel?
I like all of those things, I guess.
Do you
Maybe
also
equally?
write short stories?
Yeah,
and
I
novels
also I also do write short stories, and I have my undergrad thesis was a novel, and I'm currently writing screenplays or trying to learn how to write screenplays. I guess in any given week, I work on interactive fiction and non-interactive fiction projects equally. But I've found that Twine makes it very easy to start and finish a project, and so I've actually finished more of those over the past year than non-interactive projects.
So do you like interactive more than non-interactive, or are they both just means to tell a story for you?
I think they're both just means to tell a story for me, but I think there's more to discover right now about interactive fiction and narrative design for interactive projects than there is for non-interactive, because non-interactive has been around longer.
Well, talk about that. Like, what do you mean by more to discover? Because it just hasn't been popular until the last few years.
Yeah, and also people are not taking advantage, I think, particularly in commercial spaces, of the possibilities that exist for interactive storytelling. For example, with Twine, the basic structure for a Twine story is a really, really bare bones hypertext story, right? So you've got text on the page, and then you've got links, and when you click links, they take you to a different passage in the story. But you can actually use JavaScript plugins to change the way the text behaves on the page. So with some JavaScript plugins, you can have a link, instead of taking you to a different passage, replace some of the text on the page with different text, right? So let's say I've got the sentence, cupcakes are my favorite food, and maybe I can make cupcakes a link. I can turn it into a regular link, and when I click on the word cupcakes, it'll take me to a different passage that'll say, cupcakes are great. But if I use a replace link, I can make it so that when you click on the word cupcakes, it changes the word cupcakes to steak, right? And then the page will say, steak is my favorite food.
So it's kind of dynamically changing the story
Yeah.
based on your interactions with it.
Yeah, but I can go even further than that. I can have it, when I click on the word cupcake, instead of saying cupcakes are my favorite food, it'll say cupcakes are death and they will kill us all, right? And so branching out from there, you can actually make the way the text behaves on the page get really, really, really complicated. There's a cycling link macro that you can use that when you click on the link, it'll cycle between different things. So maybe you click on it and it says cupcakes is my favorite food. You click on it again, it says steak is my favorite food. You click on it again, it says cupcakes again, right? JavaScript plugins allow you to do almost anything you want to text on the page. You could change it in a whole bunch of different ways. And I think that the possibilities that JavaScript plugins give to Twine stories are not like, they don't affect the story the way that fonts affect a book. They affect the story the way whole new words can affect a story, right?
Yeah, that's what I find so interesting, because people talk, story games. There's obviously like the Walking Dead series from Telltale Games is really popular right now, and it does a really good job communicating a story in a newer type way. But you're talking about just pure words and ways you communicate, and that space has really not been explored. The closest comparison you can make to people is those old choose your own adventure books where you're reading a page and they say, okay, if you want to do this, turn to page 50. If you want to do that, turn to page 70. And that's just so bare bones for what you can do now with the technology, and randomly replace those words and switch them out and have new meanings, and then use those meanings to take the story in different directions. that is a really cool space. I love playing those kinds of games. You don't see them very many places, right? Like, they're not popular in the App Store. There's no category for interactive fiction at a bookstore. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it hasn't taken off? This isn't new tech, right?
Well, I think
it's been around a while.
I think that Twine, in fact, is this taking off. Many, many years ago, in the 90s, hypertext was a cool thing in English departments. People were, teaching literary theory classes about what hypertext meant for storytelling and for narrative. However, hypertext didn't really take off at all. And part of the reason for this was that the only authoring tools for hypertext stories cost hundreds of dollars, right? There are still people out there trying to sell you hypertext authoring tools for $80, right? But in the past, you would have to pay $200 to $300 for a thing like this. And it was almost as expensive and almost as difficult to actually publish these things, right? Twine publishes these stories for free because Twine is an open source free tool. Twine will automatically create, and that's what I mean by publish. It'll create the story for you as an HTML file. But in the past, you would have to either ask the company that made the tool to make it for you, or it would make it as like a .exe or something like that, right?
Yeah, and that's much harder to
much
distribute.
Harder, right? Twine did not take off. Twine didn't take off as a, sorry, I'm not Twine, I'm an idiot. Hypertext did not take off. Hypertext didn't take off as a thing in English departments. It didn't take off as a thing for ordinary people to read. In the 90s, it was, a flash in the pan. But Twine is so much easier for people to access, and it's so much easier for people to use that I think it is taking off, right? 2-3 years ago, there weren't a lot of Twine stories on the internet, but now there's a lot. I think that maybe there's, 1 or 2 interesting, worthwhile Twine stories coming out a week. And that's so much more than previously, And over time, the Twine community has been growing. It's been growing slowly. And it started out as 0, so, even with all the growing it's been doing, it isn't particularly big right now. But I think over time, it will get bigger and it'll have more of an impact. Depression Quest is a Twine story or a Twine game that was just greenlit on Steam, right?
Oh, nice.
So, Twine is going places. I think the reason that Twine is going places is because it's completely accessible. It creates HTML files, right? There's no reason why you couldn't use raw Twine source code in a different game, right? You could write something to interpret that and put it inside another game. So the opportunities for that have barely been explored, I think.
Yeah, you could make, in theory, a Unity plugin that takes your Twine story and then implements it into some type of full 3D visual novel. I haven't seen that kind of converter yet, but technically, it's just waiting to happen.
I'm almost 100% sure that someone has already done this already and that I've seen it.
Oh, yeah?
On indiegames.com or something.
I totally want to link to that after the show because I would love to see that because I've always been fond of text adventures and story-based games. Have always been one of my favorites to play. I mean, some people, it maybe just boils down to just people don't like to read, right? Like, part of app development in general, which has been where the indie game space has really exploded, is that people using an app, they have 30 seconds to play a game or maybe a couple minutes at the most. They're in line. They don't want to sit down and read a bunch of text. And so it's kind of thought as good design in the app space is to have as few of words as possible. But then these story-based games, it's the opposite of that. They're just walls and walls of text. That isn't to say that people aren't interested. I mean, look at games like Gone Home that came out recently. It's a full 3D game you explore, but 90% of that game is you're reading. You're reading people's old letters. You're reading the posters on the wall. You're reading the audio journals, I guess. It's audio, but it's just a story that's being told to you. And through those words, you kind of piece together a cohesive game. It's something that's interesting and compelling to a lot of people. So when did you first start getting into interactive fiction? When did you first get into this hypertext stuff? Was it Twine that started you into it?
I've always been interested in parser games ever since I learned that they existed when I was in middle school or high school.
Well before Twine, then.
When I was in college, I took a class about digital games. I took it to fulfill the technology and applied sciences requirement at my college. And while I was there, at the time I was already an English major. And while I was in this class, it occurred to me that for my English thesis, I could write a parser game, right? And so I went to the English department and I said, hey guys, I want to do an independent study or a thesis about parser games. I want to teach myself to do this. And the English department stonewalled me, basically. None of the professors there understood what a parser game was already, and none of them were interested in learning. I later discovered that several years previously, a student had written a thesis in the English department about the game Portal. However, a traditional American literature professor had gone to his thesis reading and had actually heckled him. So the English department was super not into games, and they were super not into the idea of me doing a parser game thesis, and so I eventually just gave up. But that was already percolating at the back of my mind. And when I learned that Twine existed, I was really interested in it. And I didn't have a lot of spare time at the time because I had just moved to the Bay Area and I was, getting settled here and doing a lot of stuff for work. But over time, the amount of writing that I was doing at work as a quest writer sort of petered off, and then my job actually changed from quest writer to something else. And I realized that I wanted to keep writing interactive stuff, but that I was going to have to do it in my spare time. And I took another look at Inform and at parser games, but I discovered that it was much easier to finish projects and to have control over the way projects looked and felt in Twine than it was in Inform. I like parser games, but they have a very, very small audience, and the amount of work needed to finish a parser game is insane. So part of the reason that I ended up doing hypertext is partially because I'm lazy. With hypertext, you can create an entire complicated experience in a fraction of the amount of time that it can take for you to make a parser game, and I'm not really so wedded to the idea of parser game supremacy that I, would want to stick with them.
Well, how long does it take you to make these kinds of games?
For a Twine game, the Twine game that I'm most proud of, Swan Hill, took me 3 months to make. I worked for about 2 to 3 hours every night during the height of the time that I was working on it. It took me a crazy amount of time. I don't know exactly how many hours, but it was basically all I was doing. My friends didn't see me for a while.
Yeah, but relative to game development, that's not necessarily a crazy amount of time. 2 to 3 hours for 3 months, that kind of balances out, a couple a month or so of full-time work. That's pretty common for a lot of game developments of, games that have had really thought out quality, right? Obviously, you can make like a game jam game in 24 hours, but it's a polished project. I wouldn't say that's particularly slow.
It's a crazy amount of time, I think, compared to the amount of time I usually spend working on, for example, a short story.
How long do you normally spend on a short story?
If I've got the idea really down and I know exactly what I'm doing, I can finish a short story to my satisfaction in a month, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that's how long it would take me to write Swan Hill. But something that I've discovered is that when you start working on an interactive fiction project, when I start working on an interactive fiction project, I usually underestimate the amount of work I'm going to need to do by 100%. It'll take me twice as long to make the thing as I think it'll take, or 3 times as long.
That's a pretty common game development experience in general.
Yeah. So I guess that is completely typical. I don't know. I haven't gotten any better at that, and I've worked on a couple projects since Swan Hill that I have finished but have not actually put on the internet.
Are they taking you about 3 months to make, or was that particularly slow compared to your other games?
They're taking me about 3 months to make, but I haven't even spent as much of my free time on them as I did on that other project.
So you're only working them not 2 or 3 hours every day, but just a side thing.
Yeah, the reason that I'm not spending as much time on them is because I want to get another writing job in the games industry, like I did when I first started out in the games industry. And something that I've discovered is that some companies only want to see screenplays. They don't want to see previous game work. I don't know why this is. So I've been spending most of my free time teaching myself how to write screenplays.
Interesting. So ideally, you'd want to work making games full-time, writing for games full-time.
Yeah, I'd like to get paid to do the thing that I like the most, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know how long that's going to take me. So for now, I'm spending the vast majority of my time making games as hobby games.
Have you thought about taking some of your games and putting them on the App Store? I mean, I've played Swan Hill, and I really enjoyed it. I think you could, turn that into an app, and, you're not going to be a #1 app with it, but you could get a bunch of downloads with it.
Swan Hill's a 20-minute experience or less if you go really slow. If I made an app with a bunch of Twine games in it, that's what I would do. I would make an app with a whole collection of Twine games in it. And so that would be something a couple years down the line, I think, once I have more than one Twine game I'm really proud of.
I don't know. I think a 20-minute experience isn't necessarily bad, especially since that's an experience that I played through multiple times. There was some differences. I clicked some things the first playthrough, and I didn't click everything in other playthroughs. I think that you could put that in the App Store. You never know what happens. And even if you put it out there for free, that's just more people playing it, more people interested in your next project.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem putting Swan Hill by itself out right now for free as an app.
It's HTML, so you can pretty easily put it on every platform. There's a bunch of templates. I know Windows has a template for HTML5 games, and so you can just load that file there and be good to go.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. But if I sold it for money, I would want to sell a. I don't know why I want this, but I'd like to sell an experience that, at minimum, took you more than an hour to experience, right?
Well, you also got to remember the app market. They're 30-second experiences half the time, right? Like those players, 20 minutes is a long time.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily see people sitting down and consuming the whole hour of this all at once.
No, true.
Right.
But it doesn't need to have like a full hour's worth of gameplay to be releasable. You can also, installment it, right? You can release as, this is the first episode, and then if a bunch of people download the first episode for free and like it, you can release episode 2 for $1, and then it's like an in-app purchase to unlock the rest.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know. Something that I like about Twine is that the community is really into accessibility, right? Twine is really easy to pick up. Twine is really easy to learn how to use. Like, you can literally learn how to use it in less than 5 minutes. Twine games are really easy to pick up and play. There's, everybody already knows how to click links. Not everybody knows how to type in parser commands, but everybody knows how to click links. And I do understand that selling Twine games is viable, but to some extent it does, like a couple people have actually started selling Twine games. I know Ananthropy sold a Twine game about a spooky haunted house that was actually pretty fun. I paid for it and I enjoyed it. But selling a Twine game on the App Store, I don't know how that would affect. I'd have to sit down and think about the kind of experience I was trying to give people, because it would be very different from the web Twine experience, just because it would be so much less accessible in general, right? You'd have to count on somebody picking it up, count on somebody wanting to pay for it, count on how they'd react after they discovered that, maybe this experience was less than 20 minutes long, So I'd have to do a lot of thinking about it first, I guess.
It never hurts to experiment and try, right? You just take one of your existing projects and, throw it out there, or even just have like a Laura app that's like, links to your existing games right now. I mean, if they're web pages, they probably work on mobile devices right now.
They do. I do know that some people are working on Twine story formats, or a story format in Twine. Right now, Twine, when you download it, there's only 2 story formats. There's one, Sugarcane, which looks terrible on mobile. Sugarcane has a sidebar, and for some reason, most of the times I've picked up Sugarcane games on mobile, the sidebar sort of gets superimposed over the main text of the story, and it looks kind of weird. So when I worked on Swan Hill, I decided I wanted something that you could look at on a mobile screen. So I went in and I had to reteach myself CSS and then figure out how to delete the sidebar and stuff like that. But people are working on mobile-centric story formats that would not have these problems.
So what topics do you like to have your stories be about? Do you do like medieval fiction, modern setting?
So far, the 2 Twine games that I've finished have both been sort of like fantasy stories. I wrote one that was sort of like a horror Conan the Barbarian kind of story about a Conan the Barbarian type dude who gets eaten by a H.P. Lovecraft monster. And then the other Twine story that I finished was a sort of a medieval-ish kind of fantasy story. One of my majors in college was early modern Europe. I did the history of early modern Europe, so I like sort of like fantasy-ish stories set in not quite medieval, but sort of like Renaissance-y kind of time. So those are the two stories that I've written in Twine so far. But, in my spare time, I also write a lot of science fiction and realistic fiction type stuff too.
Do you think that medieval lend itself better for Twine-like games, or just that's what you chose to start with?
That's just what I chose to do. The cool thing about hypertext and about, interactive fiction and interactive games, interactive story games in general, is that unlike traditional sort of like video games where you need to have dynamic actions taking place all the time in order to keep people interested, you don't really need to have fighting or, crazy adventures in these stories. You can tell really interesting, engrossing stories about more ordinary kinds of lives and more ordinary kinds of experiences. But there are a lot of Twine games about science fiction and horror and fantasy out there because, we like that stuff, so
yeah,
people write it.
Some of the most popular fiction out there,
Yeah.
both in terms of quantity being made and being consumed.
Yeah.
So you talked about it a little bit, but what would you say is the biggest differences in writing a story non-linearly versus, a short story where you have like a beginning, middle, end?
So one of the most important things to me whenever I write anything is that I am not only telling a story about stuff that happens, but that I'm also, quote unquote, saying something, right? I don't like to write, even though I had to do this for work a lot when I was a quest writer, I don't like to write stories that don't have a point, right? And when you write a novel or a short story or something and you're trying to communicate an idea, you can illustrate this thesis with specific actions that happen in the story. But when you're writing a nonlinear story, maybe you can't always be certain that the reader will see every part of the story. So you need
They might gloss over a certain part or to not go down a different chapter or alleyway or some other choice that they'll make.
Yeah, so when you write these stories, you have to make sure that if you're telling a story that has like a specific thesis, like a specific point that you're trying to get across, then you have to write the story in such a way that all the key moments that illustrate that point get covered by everybody, right? But you don't have to come at it with that idea anyway. You don't have to be trying to illustrate a thesis. You can also be just trying to cover different themes. So something that happened when I was writing Swan Hill was that I realized that I didn't want to write the story in such a way that everybody saw the same events all the time and reached the same conclusion. I wanted to go over a general set of themes rather than a general set of specific points, right? So then that completely changed the way I thought about the ending of the story and about the way that I had to write the story. I realized that I could cover a broader set of related themes rather than a specific, point. And it also let me sort of pull back a little bit and realize that I could make this story, I could fill the story with characters that had their own agendas, and then instead of showing them inevitably interacting in a specific way, I could show all the different ways that those agendas might succeed or not. It's a little difficult to explain, but I could have, different endings where different themes were realized, which was pretty cool to me.
Another cool thing about Swan Hill, so it's a hypertext game like you were talking about before, and you'll get choices of where, I say this to that person or I go over there, but then there's also text where you can click it and it will expand the text out like you're talking before, where it's like, oh, I like cupcakes, and you click it, it's like, oh, I like steak.
Yeah.
And in that game, when you click it, you kind of learn more about the person's thoughts. Like they say, I like cupcakes, and you click it, it says, I like cupcakes because they're very sweet. Or
yeah.
So, that's an example. I'm not a very good writer, so my examples aren't as good as yours. But do you intend the player to always click through those links, or do you expect them to not necessarily see everything?
The reason that the black links are in Swan Hill is I wanted to use interaction with the text to illustrate the character's state of mind, right? I wanted, when people click the black links, for the way the information is revealed to mimic the way that somebody might think about something. So For example, the character sees his brother doing something, and when you click on one of the black links relating to his brother in the story, then it will expand into other stuff he remembers about his brother, right? And this is sort of the way that you might think about your own brother or your own, family member. When you see them walking around doing stuff, you'll remember things that happened to them in the past. So I was using the black links in order to illustrate things about the main character without actually writing it out, right? So like in a short story, if you've got an introspective character, you have to, show them thinking introspective thoughts, or like maybe just say, this character's very introspective, right? But with hypertext, you could actually illustrate that introspectiveness through the way that the text and the story details are revealed, which is what I was doing with the black links. So I wanted people to click the black links because it was part of the characterization in the story, but I understood that they might not always do that. And I didn't want to make it necessary for them to click the black links because that would sometimes affect the structure of the page in a negative way. So my ideal reader would click all the black links, but I also wrote it in such a way that if you click the minimum amount of black links, you'll still understand the story. I had to go through and make sure that that was the case, and I had to add a couple screens to make sure that like all of the necessary data would get given to the player, even if they didn't click all the links that I wanted them to.
Have you gotten feedback about the game that most of your players did click the links, or like have you gotten any feedback at all, actually?
Most of my players did click the links, apparently. Before I put the game up on the internet, I tested it on about 15 people, one of whom was actually you. Mm-hmm. And most of the people told me that they were clicking all of the links, at least the first time through. I did have someone tell me that the second time through, when they wanted to see what would happen in other circumstances, they clicked almost none of the links, and they just, scooted through the story to get to the part where it branched again.
Yeah, I think I clicked like 80% of them. There were times where I'm like, no, I'm not interested in knowing his thoughts on that. But most of the time I was, so I clicked through.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of like in like the more exciting parts of the story. I like didn't want to take the time. I wanted to know what was happening next, so I clicked through, which is kind of a cool narrative device in itself.
Yeah.
Of focusing on like the action in that moment.
Yeah. Something that I realized when I was working on this project is that in most mainstream games, interactive narrative is sort of hyper-focused on the idea of choices, right? And the idea of the player's agency in the story being to affect the ending or to affect the course of events, right? And I love games like that, but then working on this made me realize that interacting with the narrative in any way is also a form of agency, right? So I could have written this story with no choices, and the central mechanic of sort of uncovering the thoughts and the player having to dig for these thoughts and having to participate in the way they're revealed would still be there, right?
Yeah, because that's the choice.
Yeah, and so this is kind of what's going on in Gone Home, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't change what your family members do in Gone Home. They've already done it when you start the game, right? But you are still, inextricably part of the story, because unless you went through digging it all up, it wouldn't exist, right? These fragments of their lives would never come to the surface.
Yeah, you could kind of choose to walk through that house and kind of walk through the end.
Yeah.
Or you could dig through every drawer, play every tape.
Yeah.
And you'll learn way more about the characters and what's going on, and have different attitudes towards the father character and the mother character specifically.
Yeah.
Based on what you find of them.
And I think that I don't really expect all the game players in the world to sit down and say, man, I'm really focused on choice, but interactive narrative is actually way more complicated than just choices, and you can have a good one without any choices at all. I don't expect people to say that, but I think that taking advantage of the possibilities of interactive fiction that have nothing to do with choices, like making sure that if your story has a bunch of choices in it, that you're also using these other narrative techniques that are very interactive but aren't about choice, can actually make the experience a lot richer. So, if Gone Home did have choices in it, I think they would be more satisfying choices than, for example, the choice at the end of, what was that game, Singularity, where there were no choices in the game, and then you got to the end and it was like a three-way choice, and you're like, what? And it just sort of, stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of games kind of spring that, like, surprise choice.
Yeah, like...
They just make a save point that you play through all three in order anyway. Like, no one, it really makes that choice. They all see every ending.
Yeah, like, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of different ways to get people to participate in narrative, and not all of them are about choice. And that's been, I think, the most valuable thing that I discovered working on this game.
Very interesting. So you mostly work by yourself, but every now and then you do teams, like you talk about at game jams, working with other people.
I really like game jams. I think that in an ideal universe, the minimum amount of recharge time I would have to suffer between game jams, if I had no other social obligations, would be a game jam every 3 weeks. I think I could handle that. But I really, really like them, and I go up to the city to do them whenever I can. I worked on Desert Hike with a team. I worked on a game called You Monster with a team in 2012. I worked on an interactive fiction story for the first Molly Jam about a baby made out of cardboard. I'm actually doing the Global Game Jam in a couple weeks, but I really, really like working with small teams on games. When I was in college, I was an editor for a humor magazine, and I really missed the group editing environment where we would all get together and work on stuff together. And we would sometimes write articles where it didn't even have a byline because we all contributed to it, you know. And I really miss that. And the closest I can get to that now is game jams.
So do you like having new people every jam, or do you like having like a group of people who you gel with really well and you've worked with before?
So far, I haven't done enough of them to you know, have a group that I come back to over and over again, but I do like to have a vague familiarity with at least a couple of the people in the team. I've discovered that being extremely close friends with somebody in a game jam team is not always the best idea, because you know each other too well to, you know, but...
I'll talk about that. Why is that a problem?
Not everybody does the best they can possibly do in 48 hours with very little sleep, right?
Oh, you get kind of frustrated with people.
Yeah, and if I'm doing it with strangers, then it's just like, hey, so long as everybody is enthusiastic and tries hard, you know, there's not a lot of... The cool thing about game jams is it's not like when you do stuff for work and you have to do it perfect all the time. Everybody knows that game jams are, you know, unusual circumstances, and it takes a lot of the pressure off. You don't have to make the best thing you've ever made. You just have to, you know, have fun doing it and learn something. And, I don't know. I like working with strangers so long as they are enthusiastic and, you know, doing the best they can do under the circumstances.
Cool. So besides the upcoming Global Game Jam, what projects are you working on right now?
I am working on a Twine story that is a linear story. That this is you know, related to what I said before about choices not necessarily being the major part of interactivity. I'm working on a linear story where you can't change what happens in the story, but the story is presented completely out of order, and every time you play it, you will experience it in a different order, so it's a little bit random.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah. It's kind of just like a narrative experiment to myself to see if I can write something like that. The player is dropped into the middle of the story, and then they can choose to either go forward or backward in time. And I was trying to write it and construct it in such a way that it still made complete sense and the player is still able to understand the series of events, even though I have no control over the order that they read them in.
So when you say go back in time, you don't go like to right before, you go to some period before.
Yeah, what I did is I organized the entire story into 4 tiers of events, and then in order to understand the events in the second tier, for example, you have to read all the events in the first tier, but you can read them in like whatever order. So I'm working on that. I don't know if I'll ever release it. I actually finished it once already and then decided that I didn't like the way that the player chose how to move around the story. What I did with the first time, I had each passage in the story linked by keywords, and each keyword would link to a story that had a theme similar to the keyword that you clicked on. So if the sentence was, I hate everyone, and then you clicked on the word hate, then the next passage would be like, this is a story about how I hate everything, you know. But I decided that method was too reliant on me deciding which passages were related to other passages. And I didn't think that the reader would feel like they were having any agency at all, because they were just sort of like hoping that I would link them to something interesting. So I decided to change that and replace it with like time arrows, like forward and backward play buttons, so that you would move around time-wise. And I thought that would also give the story a little bit more context so they can understand what was going on and in what order.
That sounds really, really cool. You absolutely should release that. I'm like super excited just from that pitch. I'd pay $2 for that game, even if it was only a 20-minute experience.
It's got a lot more straight up words than Swan Hill. Each section, like each page, it's just like a page of writing, right? Like
It's all the more reason why I pay $2 for that. Like people buy like short stories on Kindle or whatever that are like 2,000 words, and they'll pay like $3 for that.
But anyway, I'm working on that. The theme of that is it's a science fiction story, and the idea that made me start thinking about it is, why does Han Solo hang out with Chewbacca, right? Like, why does a human dude hang out with some weird alien who doesn't even like speak words? You know, like what
The
would
forming of that friendship.
what would cause two people from such wildly different environments to leave everybody else like themselves and hang out with somebody who is so different from them, right?
Does the story itself have anything to do with time travel?
No,
Okay.
the reason that. One of the reasons I decided to write the story the way I did is because I wanted a long amount of time with a lot of discrete events that weren't necessarily related to each other in like a intimate way, right? Like, let's say that you're trying to tell Lord of the Rings this way. Well, you can't really, you know, like why would it be exciting to read about Frodo, you know, going into the fires of Mount Doom if you hadn't read all the bits leading up to it and you didn't know why he was there? So I needed to write a story that had interesting things happening, but these things were happening kind of apart from one another, and they weren't directly necessarily related.
Yeah, and that's something that only exists in this interactive fiction space. Like
Yeah.
the closest you get to that is Memento, but you know that kind of story is still a very guided experience. You're getting certain parts of the timeline. And
Yeah, because in Memento, it's very important that you see those events in that order in order
Yeah.
for it to have the effect that it has. But I wanted to write. So anyway, what I did is I wrote a story that took place over like 10 years in the lives of these two characters. One's a person, the other one's an alien, and a whole bunch of really shitty stuff happens to them. But each one of the shitty things that happens to them is sort of like a little isolated, and you know they're related. These events are related to one another, but you don't need to read them in a specific order in order to find interest in any one of the events. So that was my goal. I don't know if I've achieved it yet. I think it'll be a while before I finish it, but
I'm really excited. I want to play it. I hope you let me play test it when it's ready for that.
thanks.
So at the end of the show, I always like to talk about games we've been playing lately. And speaking of writing games, I finally finished The Novelist. I say finally, but it actually came out fairly recently. I don't know if you've had a chance to try it yet, but you play a ghost in a house, and you observe this family in their day-to-day lives of a novelist. And it takes place, I forgot what year it is, but it's not present today. And you have, based on what you observe and what you read of their thoughts, and you like invade their memories and go through their memories as a ghost, and based on what you find out what they want in the house, and the kid has a different goal than the mom, has a different goal than the dad, and then you get to decide, well, who's going to get their way, and you kind of help things happen for that particular person. It's like on paper the kind of game that it'd be like 10 out of 10, best game ever, everyone should play this game. But having played through it, it's like it was good. I would definitely say it's very, very good, but it's maybe not the kind of game that I'll like sit everybody down and force them to play like Brothers or The Walking Dead.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard about it, and I was planning on playing it.
Yeah, and you definitely should. Like, you specifically would be way into that kind of game, and you should definitely try it out. But I just don't know if it was like such an amazing experience, because it was from a game point of view, it was really, really easy, and it was kind of boring at times because you either turned off the game aspects at all and you just made it so that you were always invisible, or you have to like lie in wait, and it was just like waiting arbitrarily. Okay, wait. His back is turned. Okay, now I can move.
I've heard that you possess a lot of lamps.
Yeah, so you're invisible when you're possessed in a lamp, but otherwise you can like walk out of the lamp and then you're seen, and then if they see you, you can't make good things happen to them. Like they can't get their way because like they're spooked or something like that.
Interesting.
So it's like arbitrary, like stealth mechanics, and it wasn't exactly compelling. And then the story itself was like, it was good and it was interesting, but I didn't feel like I wanted to replay it or felt I was affecting it in a major way. It was kind of like, okay, this kid didn't get his way, and then he went to his room and he was upset. And the dad did get his way, and he felt a little bit better that day, which was cool. But
So it didn't feel like there was much at stake.
No, it wasn't like Gone Home, where I don't want to spoil Gone Home, but like I love that experience so much, and the way that story is structured and the way I discovered it. And that's the kind of experience I hadn't seen in games, and the kind of experience that I wouldn't see in other kinds of games. But I appreciated Novelist was novel. It was different. It was an experience that's not typical. So it's definitely worth the money, definitely worth buying, definitely worth playing. But if you're not thrilled by the pitch alone, you're probably not going to be thrilled with the game.
Cool.
So what about you? What kind of games have you been playing lately?
I have been playing Long Live the Queen, which is a combination visual novel / princess simulator game, and it is amazing. I thought it was going to be the worst thing ever, but I noticed that a bunch of my friends on Steam were playing it, and so finally I saw it on Steam and I bought it. You play a princess of a magical fantasy kingdom whose mother has died, and you are preparing for your coronation. And every week you choose different things to study, and then at the end of the week there's like a little story thing that happens. And if your skills aren't up to par, then horrible things will happen to you in your kingdom and you might die. And there are apparently 11 deaths, and I've found 2 of them so far. And I've also gotten to situations where I couldn't survive because I hadn't learned, for example, court manners or something. Like I didn't learn court manners, and then I went to a ball and everyone hated me, and then everyone started trying to steal the kingdom from me, and I was like learning falconry and like dog handling, and like these skills weren't useful, and I was like, what have I done? But I don't know. It's just so weird. It's like
That sounds really fun.
it's a weird little like princess simulator game with like very, bright like anime drawings, but very sort of like dark and depressing things happen to you, and you can have different moods that affect the rate at which you learn things, but all the moods are negative, right? They're all like angry, depressed, lonely. Like you get like boosts to learning singing if you're really depressed, right? Like it's that kind of game. I don't know.
That sounds really interesting. How long does it like take to get through all the weeks? Like an hour to get through each playthrough, or?
Well, there's like no waiting in the game. Like you click, I want to learn this week, and then you click and you like just learn it, and it's like, okay, next week, what do you do? But like the first time I played it, it took me a really long time to figure out what I wanted to do because I had to read all the story and everything that everybody was saying. Mm-hmm. But then I died, and I was like, well, what if I had done this instead? So then I went and I replayed it, and I just like clicked really fast through everything everybody was saying. I don't really know how long it took me to do that because I wasn't keeping track, but it was certainly under like 3 hours to like get through the first playthrough and then die. But then immediately I wanted to play again, so.
That's always a good sign.
Yeah, that's a great sign.
Very cool. So where can we find your games? What's your blog?
lauramichet.com, and then you click. So my website is 2 links that I just put on a blank web page. One says blog, so then you click on that. My website is lauramichet.com, and then once you get to my blog, there's going to be like one of the little tabs on it is projects, and there I've listed all of the games and writing projects that I've done over the past 2 years.
Awesome. If you want to find more about me, you can go to tobiahmarks.com. That's my blog, and I have a bunch of resources for game developers, or you could follow me on Twitter at Tobiah Marks. Do you have a Twitter?
Yes, L Michet, Lmichet.
Awesome. If you want to follow the show, it's at BNDNow, or you go to its website, bndnow.com, where you can find past shows, show notes, cool stuff like that. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Laura, for talking about non-linear interactive fiction. Very, very cool stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Go out there and make some games.